Hi, everybody. I am here to talk you through gerontology. So let's get started on that. It shouldn't take us too long to do this. Right. So here we go. All right. So we skipped around a little bit, but now we are back on track and we're going to be going in order. Chapter 8. So working with older people. Okay, so basically, gerontology is the practice of working with people who are over 65. And the reason why it's relevant to talk about this in a specific way, instead of just, assuming that every so often you're going to, run into an older person in whatever role that you're working in, is that there are a number of demographic changes that make it even more relevant. By 2030, so think about that, that's 9 years from now, 20% of Americans will be over 65. So that is, a lot of people. And so it's not just about, well, I might run into an older person in my role. You will, whatever your role is, run into older people. So remember that as the birth rate goes down and people are living longer, that proportion is going to continue to change and change and change. Okay, so there are some things that you need to be aware of around the biological, physiological, and cultural aspects of aging. And I just wanted to highlight a few of these. So like the thing that I think is really, really important to remember is that, at the moment, about a fifth of older folks are members of the dominant group, so white people, frankly. And pretty shortly, they didn't put a date on this, but pretty shortly, it's going to almost double. And as such, we need to really think about that concept of cultural humility, and to understand that aging and the issues around aging are very culture dependent, and that many cultures handle aging by turning their households into multi-generational ones. And as people are living longer, that's becoming a kind of longer term issue. It's something that we always need to be aware of, because whenever you do family work, this is something you're very likely to run into. That being said, there's almost no area in social work where understanding at least the basics of gerontology is not useful. So, okay. All right. So by and large, I want you to understand that, there's all these issues around older folks, that are listed there, the retirement and widowhood and physical decline and all of that stuff. But you are mainly going to run into older folks in a different context. You're not going to run into them when you're talking to people about retirement. You're not going to run into them when you're talking to people about being widowed or physical decline or whatever. I mean, there are certainly those jobs. They for sure exist. But by and large, you're going to encounter older people in the context of some other issue. So, substance abuse or mental illness or whatever the issue is that you're working with, you're going to encounter older folks. And so you need to kind of be aware of these issues in the context of those other things and how they kind of interact together. It's also useful to know what normal aging is. And like there's a lot of myths in our culture about what normal aging is, that there's a certain type of forgetfulness that's normal, and there's all sorts of ideas around that aren't necessarily true. So it's really useful when you go into the field to kind of be aware of what's normal, what isn't normal, because a lot of times you're the eyes on the situation. You're the one that's going to be raising red flags if there aren't any to raise. Okay, So there are basically two theories around aging, and one of them is the activity theory, which is that successful aging is about staying active and staying engaged in activities in the community, and the other is disengagement theory, which is that it's normal and okay to withdraw as you age. And I guess that for me, I never quite understood why these two things were pushed against each other because I don't see them as um, you know, mutually exclusive. It's this sounds to me like aging for extroverts versus aging for introverts, right? Like it sounds to me like, people who have gone through their lives and are happiest and most energized by being involved in, more social stuff and more community-based stuff are going to be happier for longer when they continue that into old age. Makes sense, right? But also that people who have always drawn their energy from being solitary, from being alone, are going to continue to do that in old age. So, I'm not sure that it's a good idea to, put your stake down on one side of this or the other. I think it's very important to kind of like, as always, keep an eye on the people in front of you and understand the client that you're dealing with. That being said, there's a lot of science around cognitive decline, and that basically the more engaged you are in your cognition, the more the easier the aging process is, the more facilities you keep for longer, that sort of thing. That doesn't mean that you need to like, be going out and scuba diving with your 70-year-old friends. It doesn't mean that necessarily, but that like, if you are reading, if you are doing your crosswords, if you're reading the paper or whatever, those things are likely to keep you sharper longer. Okay, so this is a slide that the publisher created all on their own. I didn't modify it in any way, but I think that this is probably true. These are critical issues in the field of aging. For sure, there's these last two are ones that it's hard to get away from. There's this concept of the sandwich generation. So, folks who are like, in their 30s and in their 40s, and they're playing this game of sort of, balancing their own small children while also caring for their parents who are getting older. And this is something that impacts most people in some way. And in the United States, it's a sticky one, right? Because we don't have great structures for caring for children or caring for older people. And so like every family is sort of like left to deal with this on their own. So, to me, that's an issue, because, in families where there's not a lot of resources, it can get very sticky. So, a few more issues and concerns. As I've mentioned in the past, I do a little bit of work in hospice, and hospice is mainly older people, not all older people, but mainly older people. And it's really useful to have a thorough understanding of like the guardianship process and living wills and powers of attorney and healthcare directives and all of this stuff, and being conversant in Medicare and Social Security and Medicaid and the Family Medical Leave Act is all very helpful when you're working with older people. That being said, if all of this stuff is changing, like all the time. So I'm not sure how useful it is to get really deep into the weeds of it until you have a specific question that you're looking to answer, right? So it's one of those things where it's good to know kind of like the general structure of all of this, but until you are in a situation where you need to put some of it into practice, it's probably not that useful to spend a lot of time trying to memorize a bunch of facts. Okay, so just a little aside here about Social Security. Um, Social Security, it was never really intended to be people's sole source of retirement income. For many people, it is. And the thing that I want to highlight on this slide is that, you know, if it were not for Social Security, like more than a third of older people would live in poverty. That's a big deal. Right now it's less than 1 out of 10. So like I just feel like it's really important to remember how important Social Security is to the kind of the well-being of our social fabric. So I'm not going to belabor the point on that, but it is very important to remember how critical this social insurance program is, and as a thought experiment to think about how useful it would be to have other social insurance programs that do similar things. Um, I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time on this, but there are definitely roles that that work specifically with older people. That is what you do. Um, you know, I've emphasized the idea that you're going to encounter older people no matter what you do. But there are definitely roles where you can focus on the older population. Not real sure why adult protection is not on this slide. But like adult protection is not the same as child protection in the sense that it doesn't have the same force of law behind it. There isn't the same legal structure behind it, but it is kind of the flip side of child protective services is that there is something called adult protective services. It does matter. You can make reports in the same type of way. It's it's a very important field. Okay, so if you have any questions or anything, please come along to office hours and I will be happy to answer them. Thank you very much. Bye bye.